It's happened to every single one of us. Every so often we come across a game and we think, man, this game would be so much better in the hands of another developer. Another side to that sentiment is, this developer would have handled that other franchise so well. Direct competitors and genre games are a very common thing in our industry, which often leads to rivalries and comparisons among different franchises and different developers. Fantasy RPGs go up against fantasy RPGs, while military shooters fight it out against games of their ilk. This almost always leads to comparisons, and as a result of these comparisons, we often can't help but think, would one of these franchises maybe be better off in the hands of another developer? We're going to take that idea and run with it. In this feature, we're going to mention video game franchises that we think would be better off in the hands of a different developer. We're going to talk about who we think that developer should be and why things aren't maybe going so well for these franchises under current management. It goes without saying that this list is purely hypothetical. Entries you see in this feature are not predictions, theories, or speculation. They're simply hypotheses of why these franchises could possibly be better off in the hands of these other developers. So without further ado, let's jump right in. If you disagree with our picks or have some other ideas in mind, sound off in the comment section below. Dragon Age with CD Projekt Red. Why it isn't working so well. The Dragon Age series made a debut to remember with Dragon Age Origins, which is not just one of BioWare's most incredible achievements as a developer, but also arguably one of the greatest role-playing games of all time. However, sadly, the franchise went off the rails after a strong first outing. Dragon Age 2 was, to say the least, a disappointment for almost everyone who played it, despite a few strengths of its own. With Inquisition, BioWare took a large stride back in the right direction, and there's no doubting that it's one hell of a game. But it has its fair share of critics too, and for good reason. The franchise still lacks the flair and immaculate quality that endeared Origins to almost everyone who came within a mile of the game. And when you compare the achievements and qualities of Dragon Age Inquisition to its direct competitors in the market, the feeling that the game is lacking in a number of areas only grows stronger. How it could be done better. Almost every single thing Dragon Age sets out to do with each of its franchises, CD Projekt Red has done it and done it better with the Witcher trilogy. Characters, quest design, world design, narrative, you name it. With Dragon Age Inquisition, BioWare set out to make a huge, expansive role-playing game in the vein of Skyrim that offered freedom of exploration and a vast amount of things to do, combined with a well-designed world, a tight, engrossing narrative, and well-written characters. And it's fair to say that more or less they succeeded. But when The Witcher 3 came along a year later, it showed that while Inquisition handled a lot of these things pretty well, almost all of them could be done better. Much better. The Witcher 3 has become the new standard that all RPGs and story-focused open-world games in the industry aspire to now, so it makes sense that we'd want CD Projekt Red to be the ones to bring the Dragon Age series to its maximum potential. Killzone with Bungie. Why it isn't working so well. The Killzone series has seen a lot of ups and downs. Its first outing was, let's say, less than spectacular. And while the series recovered remarkably well after that with Killzone 2, which is one of the best first-person shooters on the PlayStation 3, everything else has been a little rocky. Killzone 3 was a fine game, but a disappointment when compared to its predecessor. The PSP's Killzone Liberation was a decent game on its own right, but it was hardly the quintessential Killzone experience. Killzone Mercenary on the PS Vita was a notable achievement, especially considering the fact that it was a proper console shooter experience on a handheld system, but ultimately, it was nothing more than Killzone Lite. Killzone Shadowfall was a beautiful looking game that took the franchise in new directions, but it was a largely forgettable game. The fact that Guerrilla Games has moved on to a completely different beast with Horizon Zero Dawn also probably doesn't bode well for the future of the first-person shooter franchise. How it could be better. When Killzone made its debut in 2005 on the PS2, it was being marketed as the Halo killer. It hardly went on to live up to that hefty tag. But who better to bring the Killzone franchise to the heights we all know it can reach than Bungie, the team that created Halo. We know the two franchises are hardly similar in terms of their tone and their focus, but can you imagine a Killzone game made by Bungie, especially the Bungie that was at the peak of their powers? The team that made games like Halo 3 and Halo Reach developing a Killzone game. Nobody would say no to that. Bungie doesn't have anything to prove when it comes to the first-person shooter genre. It would, hypothetically, be an excellent match, and one that a large number of people have surely fantasized a great deal about. Fallout with Obsidian Entertainment. Why it isn't working so well. To say that Fallout isn't doing well under Bethesda's management would be unfair and, frankly, not entirely accurate. Ever since they took over the franchise's ownership, Fallout's growth in popularity has been nothing short of remarkable. In terms of sales, the series has only gone from strength to strength, from Fallout 3's excellent sales to Fallout 4's insane figures. In terms of quality, Fallout 3 was one of the best games of its generation, but some would say that Fallout 4 was a step back. It was an oversimplification of the nuanced greatness of Bethesda titles like Fallout 3 and Skyrim, and while there's no evidence to suggest that Bethesda won't learn from their mistakes, Fallout 4 did leave somewhat of a bitter aftertaste. It was by no means a bad game, but perhaps not the one we wanted or the one the series needed. How it could be better. Okay, this one needn't even be explained. Fallout fans know just what a wonderful game New Vegas was. It was, in almost every way possible, the perfect quintessential Fallout experience. Some might even argue that it's the best game in the series. Obsidian have shown that they can develop a Fallout game, and that they can do it really well. Fans have been clamoring for another Fallout spin-off in the vein of New Vegas for a long time now, and that just goes to show that there's actual real demand for this particular combination. It's not even a hypothesis. And then there's also the fact that Obsidian is, by and large, the successor to Black Isle Studios, comprised largely of the same people who formed the classic RPG development team. Black Isle Studios were also the creators of Fallout. In a way, it can be argued that Obsidian should be the real inheritors of the Fallout franchise. Burnout with Playground Games. Why it isn't working so well? Well, because the series is dead. 2008's Burnout Paradise was the last we saw of this wonderful racing franchise, unless you count Burnout Crash. Why the hell would anyone want to do that is beyond human understanding. And while plenty of their games have been pretty good, such as 2010's Hot Pursuit and 2012's Most Wanted, the one thing fans have wanted more than anything else is another Burnout. But sadly, it looks like EA won't let that happen, especially not with Criterion having their hands full in the support role they provide on various other games. How it could be better. Ideally, a Burnout developed by Criterion themselves would be perfect, but we've established that that isn't going to happen. What's the next best thing? A Burnout game developed by Playground Games, and they're a very, very close second. Of course, that isn't going to happen either, but then again, that's the point of this feature. Playground Games have established themselves as masters of racers of the more casual ilk with the Forza Horizon series. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the extremely consistent Forza Horizon series has become one of the best racing franchises in the industry, with each entry becoming progressively better. Even separated from its parent series, Forza Horizon is a force to be reckoned with, one of the few remaining behemoths in the Microsoft lineup. What's more, Playground Games have also shown that they can make open-world racers really, really well. What a treat this would be for fans of the series. We can take comfort in the fact that there is at least one alternative universe where this is a reality. Harry Potter with ATLUS. Why it isn't working so well. You don't need to be very well informed about the video game industry to know that Harry Potter isn't exactly as huge as it should be. The franchise has become a household name through the uber-successful books and movies, but it just never reached those same heights with video games. It would be unfair to say that it has been a complete failure. Some of the movie tie-ins have been legitimately good games, not to mention that awesome Quidditch World Cup game. But ultimately, no developer has really taken advantage of the rich history in terms of both lore and setting that this property has to offer. Harry Potter games have adhered far too closely to the stories we already have, and they fail to realize the larger potential of the setting. How it could be better. Anyone who's played Persona knows just how perfect its formula is for a similar RPG set in Hogwarts. It's just so perfect, it's literally begging to be made. A Hogwarts RPG separate from Harry Potter, made in the same vein as Persona by the guys that do Persona. It's almost too perfect. Just imagine this. A game set in Hogwarts spread out over a school year. You live your life as a regular student there. You attend classes to improve your stats, you make friends and hang out with them and build your social life. You participate in extracurricular activities, hell, you even play Quidditch. Maybe you join Dumbledore's army or something along those lines. And of course, at night, you try to solve whatever the newest mystery of the year is at the school. Probably another giant secret chamber underneath Hogwarts that's infested with basilisks and dragons and dementors, and your other everyday student-killing fantastic beasts. That right there is the thing that breaks sales records. Castlevania with Retro Studios. Why it isn't working so well. Castlevania was once a behemoth in the video gaming industry, a real trendsetter, a benchmark for similar games to be followed, a franchise whose name was mentioned in the same breath as the likes of The Legend of Zelda and Final Fantasy. In the contemporary scenario, Castlevania is still a pretty big name, but most of that is down to its illustrious history rather than any recent accomplishments. It has lost a lot of its sheen and luster. It was, sadly, one of those franchises that just couldn't make the jump from 2D to 3D 2 decades ago, and shockingly enough, it still hasn't managed to do that. There have been a few bright spots. There were a handful of notable games on the DS, with Dawn of Sorrow really standing out. Aria of Sorrow on the Game Boy Advance was another memorable entry for the series. But barring these handful of games, you'd have to go all the way back to Symphony of the Night in 1997 to find the last truly great Castlevania game. Maybe it needs something new, something different. How it could be better. Retro Studios brought Metroid to the third dimension. The series went on a long break after the incredible Super Metroid, and 8 years later, Retro did the unthinkable with Metroid Prime. They turned it into a first-person shooter, and it was the best thing that had ever happened to that series. It wasn't a regular first-person shooter either. It respected the franchise's history and its identity, and despite changing perspectives and dimensions and so much else on face value, it was still, at its core, a true Metroid experience. Castlevania has been in need of something exactly like that for a long time. And you don't need us to tell you that it shares more than just a few similarities with Metroid, and not just in terms of game design. The Lord of the Rings with Bethesda Game Studios. Why it isn't working so well. It's not that the Lord of the Rings franchise has done badly in video games. There have been some great games to have made use of the license over the years, ranging across a variety of genres, including the movie tie-ins themselves. Recently, Shadow of Mordor was a flawed but exciting new entry in this mega series, and its sequel looks to be improving things even further. But with a name as massive and illustrious as The Lord of the Rings, you feel like it deserves more. Much more. There's just so much untapped potential. Tolkien's worlds have some of the richest and most interesting lore you will ever see in a fantasy series across all media, and there's so much more that can be done with it. The possibilities are truly endless. How it could be better. The Lord of the Rings is a property that, to a great extent, lives and dies by its lore. And who does lore in a traditional epic high fantasy setting better than the people who made the likes of Oblivion and Skyrim? Bethesda are a studio who know how to perfectly capture the quintessential high fantasy atmosphere, something that is vital to a true Lord of the Rings experience. And when you consider the possibility of a game set in a massive, fully interactive Middle-earth, complete with the joys of discovery and exploration, similar to, for instance, Skyrim, this prospect becomes even more mouth-watering. If Bethesda were to someday make a Lord of the Rings game, they would probably need much better writers, but it would be fair to say that they have all other bases covered. Halo with Respawn Entertainment. Why it isn't working so well. This is an issue that divides fans. Many Halo fans feel the series is doing just fine even now, under the care of 343 Industries. But the common consensus remains that ever since Bungie let go of the series after Halo Reach in 2010, Halo just hasn't been the same. Halo 4 had a pretty good campaign, but had some serious flaws in the multiplayer department. Halo 5, on the other hand, is probably the best online experience in the series to date, and is absolutely brimming with content. But unfortunately, it had a shockingly weak single-player campaign. On top of that, many people would argue that the Halo franchise has just lost much of its aura and luster in the last few years. 343 Industries are by no means ruining the franchise, and given time, they could probably turn this around. But we wonder if there are other developers out there who could hypothetically handle this challenge much better. How it could be better. When they were born as Respawn, they developed the excellent Titanfall and its sequel that is, somehow, even better. And Titanfall 2 checks all of the boxes you'd expect a typical Halo game to check. It has a thrilling, memorable single-player campaign with some excellent level design. It has a nuanced, excessively entertaining online multiplayer component. It's a tightly made first-person shooter that excels in almost everything it does. And while the style of gunplay is markedly different from what you'd expect to see in a Halo game, it's the quality that really matters here. The dream of a Halo game made by Respawn Entertainment might not be the most conventional or orthodox, but it's still a beautiful and intriguing one. Final Fantasy with Monolith Soft. Why it isn't working so well. Alright, before we begin, to be fair, it's currently going significantly better for Final Fantasy than it has in a really long time. The Final Fantasy XIII trilogy was perhaps collectively the lowest moment for the series in its entire history, what with consistently dishing out one mediocre game after another. The constant delays to Versus 13, later renamed Final Fantasy XV, didn't help things either. Final Fantasy XV came out last year, and it was, fortunately enough, really freaking good. But can we compare it to the truly great games in the Final Fantasy franchise? How far back in time would we have to go to arrive at the last great Final Fantasy game? Final Fantasy X and XII both divided fans. 9 is an underappreciated gem. 8 is the black sheep of the series. Final Fantasy VII, and to a large extent, Final Fantasy IX were the last unequivocally great Final Fantasy games. How it could be better. The JRPG genre was in dire straits until very recently, until a string of great titles brought it back from the jaws of death. Since then, a number of other great games have done their part in bringing this once great genre back to a respectable level. But Xenoblade Chronicles is, perhaps, the game that is responsible for leading the charge. The game that had everything you would want from a good JRPG. It had a great combat system, excellent music, an intriguing story, memorable characters, and a great setting. And with Xenoblade Chronicles X, Monolith Soft showed that they can still consistently make great games. Final Fantasy is a series that is now moving firmly in the same direction as these Xenoblade games, in more ways than one, and a Final Fantasy game developed by Monolith Soft would be an absolute treat, hypothetically speaking, of course. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.